different settings. There's one that is Barbara Shreve, dealing with quadratic functions. She has a combination of students in 9th, 10th, and 11th grades. And the other is Properties of Quadrilaterals for 9th and 10th grade. This is aligned with the problem of the month called The Shape of Things. But I think that what's interesting is that this shows students working at very, very different levels with mathematics. Barbara Shreve's setting is called Algebra Success, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that class means and how it supports mathematics understanding in other classes. Also in Kathy Humphreys, it's a very different structure because she's teaching in a block instruction, and the same lesson plays out over 2 different days. So there's actually 4 hours of instruction in Humphreys' classroom. We'll begin by looking at Barbara Shreve's. What I think is also really nice about Barbara's, and I think I want to call people's attention to, particularly those of you who are math coaches and principals or district leaders, is that the model of coaching on this website is fairly different from those on other cases from of other classrooms. This is a very one-on-one model. There's a quite extensive introductory lesson planning segment, and then there's a similarly extensive debrief. I think that Phil Tucker and Barbara Shreve know each other well, have worked together for a really long time, and so the coaching model here is, I think, more dialogic, more conversational, and I think also offers a kind of model for those of you who might want to get started in coaching, because it's fairly structured. He begins by, especially in the debrief, by saying, let's think fairly rigorously about the things that went well before they move on to the things that she would change. I think as teachers, a lot of times we're instantly thinking, what would I do differently? Oh, that didn't go the way that I thought it would, or and so on. But I think that really pushing to notice the things that go well too is a really important part of the function of the coach. So I think that as you compare this lesson to the other ones on the site, I think it's interesting to think about that and how this model of coaching perhaps compares to the ones that are more oriented toward the public lesson, the lesson study model, where there are lots of observing teachers and all of those people are involved in the planning and the debrief. So this is very different. I think that also here you can learn a little bit more about what Algebra Success is and is not. So here she talks about these students have been working in the regular Algebra 1 classes. This Algebra Success class is a companion to that Algebra 1 class. Algebra 1 functions as a real gatekeeper for students, as she writes up here, and that schools and math departments have this challenge of preparing more and more students to be successful in algebra. So that some of this, what I think is interesting about this case, is that it's a model for how to restructure even the curriculum, the course curriculum, at the high school level to get kids to not stop at algebra. If for whatever reason those concepts aren't coming together, they need to be able to clear that hurdle. We want students to be successful. And then as she goes through, you'll see that this is a somewhat smaller class setting. She does a lot of circulating around the classroom, has them working on different kinds of tasks as they go through, has the students coming up to the overhead projector. I think it's a fairly typical and generalizable pedagogy for high school mathematics teaching. I know that when I've observed colleagues and student teacher candidates in high school math settings, this is a pretty typical scenario. You have students coming up to the board doing math problems, but I think that you'll see in this class that there's also something about the community that she has set up that makes students who might not have otherwise been seen as capable of the levels of success that they clearly are demonstrating in this lesson. So it's a nice sort of check on our assumptions about success and lack of success, and how we get all students to succeed. As she takes them through, again, these are problems 1 has 4 parts, problem 2 has multiple parts as well, and that closure where she's getting the students to really think about what they've learned, what are those outcomes from the class. So again, very extensive resources here for the student samples of work, What were they doing? What's the, you can see even the fancy fonts that high schoolers tend to gravitate toward. But you get a chance to look through how are they approaching these problems, and how does their mastery of this idea of quadratic equations link into potential, what we can infer about their future success in mathematics. So if we go on now to the next high school level task in Kathy Humphrey's classroom, you see the students who are actually working in a really different model, almost akin to a college level mathematics seminar. She sets up a task that is fairly simple at first reading. She says, all right, I know somebody who owns a kite factory. This person needs to know what the lengths of sticks are and what angle they are and where they connect, so that you can always make the same shape of kite. This is a real world type scenario. We need to be able to say, how do mathematics equations pertain to real life scenarios? And I think how also can we get kids to get comfortable around the idea of proof. One of the things that's nice here is that there's a real model for a kind of discursive mathematics setting. And I think that if you look here, she's got all these different students, 30 students in this classroom, each of whom has a work packet. And if you see behind here, let's see, there's actually a model of how Kathy, she calls their attention to it. How do the students muddle through a mathematics problem? So what I think is lovely about this, as you go through, she has the students doing things like saying, all right, how do you put forth an idea or a hunch, and then attack it, interrogate it from multiple angles, and then maybe that leads you to a new insight, or maybe it leads you back to more muddling. And so I think that what's nice is that it's not seen as necessarily linear. The ahas in mathematical proof don't always lead you to the final solution, and that you need to persist even beyond those moments of being stumped. So I think that what you'll see in the 4 hours of instruction in this that's present on this particular documented lesson is that these students develop that thinking over time. And so I also think that Kathy Humphreys is extensively published in mathematics. She's published books, articles. She's worked as a professional developer and teacher educator. And I think that what you'll see here also in her commentary throughout is a fairly sophisticated way of thinking about how these students are improving their work, improving their thinking over time. Coach David Foster, who was also involved in documenting this lesson, has a companion narrative in this commentary. So I think that also, just as with Barbara Shreves, as you go through, it's another model of coaching, even if the coaching is in text, so that you can see how these two teachers and mathematicians are throwing these ideas back and forth, are looking at the same example of practice and having different insights. So I think that that's really interesting about this model in Kathy Humphreys. I'll now wind up this professional in-service by giving you, again, recapping what we did and giving you an overview